Today, India is listed in the low-income countries group. Human Development Report 2006 ranked India 126 out of 177 countries. I am here to study poverty, and symbolically I start my journey at the gateway of India in the city of Mumbai. Mumbai is one of the largest and fastest growing cities in the world. It's the pride of India and a symbol of accelerated economic growth and power. Many ambitious projects are in the pipeline to transform Mumbai into a world-class city and regain India's former glory. However, Mumbai is also a symbol of disparities between rich and poor. Two-thirds of India's population live in rural areas where agricultural growth rate is only 2.3%, while national economic growth is 8%. Mumbai alone contributes 40% to the national budget. The United Nations identified scheduled castes and tribes, the indigenous people of India, as the poorest people in the world. I wanted to find out what life is like for these scheduled tribes in remote rural areas of India. I traveled to Tamil Nadu, about 2,000 kilometers south of Mumbai, to the paradise of the Nilgiris, that is the home to 5 of the main tribes. The indigenous people of India are referred to in 3 ways: as tribal people, scheduled tribes, and the Adivasis. I asked Dante Kekara, the director of Accord, to explain.
All the 3 terms actually refer to the indigenous people in India. But the government of India does not like to use the word indigenous people because it's a political issue. And they would like to claim that, and they do claim that everybody is indigenous in India, and that it is not right to just take a certain group of people and say that they are indigenous. And so the government uses the word scheduled tribes, or ST as it's commonly known. And this is, at the time of independence when we are framing the constitution, the government identified all the tribal groups, or most of the tribal groups in the country who they felt had been left out of the mainstream of development, and then listed them in the constitution. It's one of the schedules of the constitution of India. When we use the word tribal, also, which is what the government likes to use, is more an anthropological term. We prefer to use the word Adivasi, because the word tribal doesn't capture their inherent right of being the first people. So Adivasi is a kind of a generic term to describe all the indigenous people of India. But still, these were people who were there from the beginning of time and have remained separate from the rest of India in many ways. And so their rights as the first people have to be recognized.
During the British rule, John Sullivan, a regional administrator, is credited with the discovery of the Nilgiris, specifically the city of Ooty, in 1819. But people have lived here for ages. The tribes preserved the pristine beauty of the hills through millennia. Yet in the 120 years or so since the British went up the hill, the unique biodiversity of the Nilgiris was destroyed.
During the colonial period, forests were nationalized. And, with the stroke of a pen, what was till then common property, even in the time of the Maharajas, before the British came here, the forests were seen as hunting grounds for sport, and was also the place, this is part of Hindu mythology, that's where the gods are, that's where the people went to do penance, and it's all tied up with that. So there is an element of sacredness about forests, which carried over, I believe, from the tribal view of forest, influenced the subsequent Maharajas' view and Hindu view of forests. Even the Maharajas and all of them saw it only as an area for sport and things like that. So they never interfered with the tribals' use of the forests in any form. But when the British came, they saw the forest as a source of revenue, because basically they needed hardwoods for the railway and shipbuilding industry. And so that was the reason for them nationalizing the forests. And so they destroyed a lot of virgin forests in these areas, the traditional forests of the Nilgiris, and started planting hardwoods like teak and rosewood and the other hardwoods which they needed for their shipbuilding industry. The forests as a source of livelihood for the tribals was taken away. This meant suddenly, overnight, because of the stroke of a pen, because of an economic decision backed by political power, the forests were taken away by the tribals, and the tribals became trespassers on land which was once their own. The second big thing that happened, which had an impact on the livelihoods of tribals, was in the middle of the 19th century, people discovered there was gold in this area. And so there were clubs formed in Britain, prospecting clubs, gold prospecting clubs. And these people came over here and started looking for gold. And they took a lot of the land, thousands and thousands of acres of land was taken on lease from the feudal landowner, which was known as the Nilambur Kovaligam. They took their land on 99-year leases to prospect for gold. But what happened was that they discovered the gold was not of that good quality. There wasn't that much of gold, and it was very deep, and it was not economical to extract the gold on a commercial basis. But then these leases were intact. Around the same time, they discovered that tea would grow at this elevation. Till then, everybody thought that tea would only grow in the upper slopes. So when they found that tea would grow in this area, these leases were sold to the tea companies, the British tea companies. And the tea companies came in here at the end of the 19th century and started clearing vast areas of land, because they had these leases. Lots of forests were cleared and lands were cleared. And they started claiming that these lands belonged to them. And so the second part of their livelihoods, which was dependent on the land, was also taken away, because the land suddenly belonged to these tea companies.
Colonization was greatly facilitated in international law. It downgraded these territories to terra nullius, or territories belonging to no one. Local people and their knowledge didn't have any international standing. For the Adivasis, ownership of land because of a piece of paper was unthinkable. They could not deal with outside pressures, and their reaction was to retreat. However, today there is nowhere to retreat. I start by visiting the isolated villages of Puddukadu, Kalampalain and Alimaya, which are situated in the northeast region of the Nilgiris in the Moya Valley. They can only be reached by a poorly maintained jungle track. The journey along this dirt track takes approximately 2 hours. Upon arrival at the end of this track, one has to then wait for a river crossing on a large coracle to reach Tekumarade, the district town for this area. The use of a coracle and a bus is the only lifeline that keeps these villages connected with civilization. Internal road infrastructure between the villages is acceptable and roads are sealed. Most of the roads are within the boundaries of the jungle and are also used as migratory routes for elephants, tigers, panthers, bears, bisons, and many other species of wildlife. I realized from local people that it is the Forest Department's policy to make the roads into this area as inaccessible as possible in order to protect the wildlife in the region. Most of the people, including children going to school, walk long distances of around 15 kilometers. For those that have a little money, there is a small four-wheel drive jeep. My first meeting with the Adivasis is in the village of Pudukadu. Access to the village is very difficult, as in the monsoon season 2 rivers flow over the road and there are no bridges. Children sometimes are unable to go to school for 1 month. Adults, if they have a bike or motorbike, have to carry it across the water. "40 families live here with a total population of 105. This is the poorest village in the area with no access to any resources even though there is land and forest around. Kodala Nanjan is the elder of the village. He is 100 years old. He told me that life was very different when he was a little boy. He and his tribe lived in Tekumarada. They had cattle that provided milk, cultivated ragi and maize. That was their main diet. The Adivasis didn't know what rice was. They used to collect sweet potatoes and honey in the forest. It was a very healthy diet. According to Kodala, 13 families lived in this area 60 years ago. The first white man he met was the administrator of the Nilgiris. He came down the hill from Kotagiri accompanied by 50-60 Badaga tribal people and told the locals to clear the land and started cultivation of rice, ragi, chili, groundnuts, sugarcane and bananas. In this way, the land that originally belonged to the rulers changed hands and became the property of the Badagas. The rulers then relocated to their current village location. This unfortunate transfer of land turned them into daily laborers and left them in the position they are in to this day. All the villagers agree that access to land remains the main issue for the village. 30 acres of unused land lies very close to the village. However, this belongs to the Kotagiri Cooperative Society, who don't do anything with this land themselves and don't allow locals to cultivate it. The Constitution of India protects the land rights of the Adivasis. Additionally, state-level laws prohibit the transfer of lands from the Adivasis to non-tribals, yet such guarantees have proved ineffective. Women of the village indicated that their health is deteriorating every year since access to the forest was restricted. There is no clinic or doctor in the area, and because of the isolation and poverty, they can't get medical assistance. They told me that many people have a variety of body pains. They don't know what is wrong with them and are unable to address such medical issues. The women further explained that they are very lucky if they get work 3 days a week. They are paid 50 rupees or 60p per day, and most of this money is spent on food. The head of the village, Badaran, said that men generate some income collecting roots, herbs, and making broomsticks. The villagers show great enthusiasm, demonstrating their knowledge on how to make use of many different natural plants that grow in the surrounding forest. People are absolutely desperate in this village and look for different ways of survival without conflicting with imposed legal restrictions. Women explained to me that they created a self-help group and have an idea to start making clothes, as nobody makes clothes in this area. They want to get 5 sewing machines some financial support for training, and some money as initial capital to start this kind of activity. Such support can be available from the government, but women don't have experience how to apply for this kind of support. In spite of such extreme marginalization, the villagers don't want to move anywhere and hope that things will change in the future. They told me that they don't want to rely on handouts. They just need to be given more opportunities. Now I am on my way to Kalampalam, the largest village in this area. It is 15 kilometers from Tekumarade. The village was established more than 200 years ago. Now it has population about 500. I did some research before coming here and hoped to find a much better situation than in Pudukadu, because this village has 126 acres of agricultural land and is surrounded by 2 rivers. The people of Kalampalam waited with great excitement to show me the village and to tell their story. The first topic of our conversation is agriculture. They first take me to see the land. I was absolutely shocked to find that despite the monsoon season being in existence, the fields were totally empty and arid, with not a drop of water in sight. When the rains come and the year is good, villagers used to grow cash crops. Now the fields are full of goats trying to find some food, and every living creature tries to find some shade because it's incredibly hot. Water channels in the middle of the field are totally dry. The villagers then take me to the river to show the entire irrigation infrastructure that they cannot use. The existing diesel-powered irrigation system was installed just 5 years ago. However, because of high fuel cost, the villagers stopped using it. Villagers believed that electric pumps would be a solution for them. However, this would be very expensive. On the other side of the village there is a dam wall on the Alimoye River that is silted up to the rim on upstream side. The check dam is badly damaged on downstream side, and water tanks that were installed some years ago are corroded and unusable. It looks that only new large infrastructure investments can bring life to this remote community. The villagers tell me that the Kalampalam irrigation project was approved by the Forest and Agriculture departments, as well as the Hill Area Development Program, and the budget was allocated. But for some reason, construction has not started. For the time being, they will have to rely on God's help, but it looks like even God may have forgotten about these desperate people, because it is raining all around the surrounding area, but not on their fields. The village economy relies totally on agriculture because there are no jobs around. If villagers want to get work on estates, they have to travel 20-30 kilometers. They usually walk as they have no money to cover travel costs, and they are very lucky if they get a job 8 days a month. Some men, like in Pudukadu, go to collect roots from the forest and then sell them. I decided to talk to 2 of the men, Subramanian, who is 32, and Stashi Babu, who is 25. They just returned from the forest after spending the whole day collecting Mavalikelenge roots that are used for food. It takes at least 2 hours for them to climb up the mountains to reach the area where the roots grow. They collect about 20 kilos each per day and are paid 4 rupees or 5p per kilo. Subramaniam lives only with his wives, but 4 members of Stashi Babu's family rely on his earning. They can hardly afford 2 square meals a day by purchasing government-subsidized rice. It is important to note that Indian Planning Commission measurement of poverty is based only on caloric norms, which is different from measurement of poverty by global institutions. If you have 2 square meals a day, you are not qualified as poor in India. Official poverty line is 12 rupees or 15p per day and remains the same since 1970. If Stashi Babu had a possibility to work 5 days a week and earn 80 rupees or £1 a day, each member of his family of 5 would still have less than 12 rupees. Center for Policy Alternatives calls it the starvation line and argues the concept of food security should be upgraded to that of nutritious food security, and it should be also the right of every Indian citizen to have access to safe shelter, water for drinking and sanitation, health care, education, and clothing. Majority of families in the village are like Stashi's Babu. They are not totally starving because of government-subsidized rice. The villagers explained that this subsidy was introduced by the present government of India and feared that they would be subjected to starvation if a new elected government decided to cancel the subsidy. Mr. Bowman, the president of the village, said that people were much healthier when they could eat the fruits of the forest. Under the Forest Conservation Act of 1980s, the Adivasis face prosecution for accessing minor forest produce, one of the means of survival since time immemorial. Subramani, the elder of the village, pointed out the alarming situation with drinking water. At the moment, there are 3 taps for drinking water in the village. 200 people use 1 tap. It gets very difficult when 1 tap is out of order and needs maintenance. In this remote village, I also found a small primary school. It is poorly equipped, but there was something special about it. There's one teacher who teaches all the various age groups in one class, but the children were very happy and surrounded with much love. The government pays the salary for the teacher and provides a free lunch for 37 children. There is also a small shop run by an 80-year-old woman who employs 2 assistants and has organized network of outside suppliers. People of the village have many ideas how to improve their life, but they are so restricted in what they can do. The village of Alimaya is very well connected with other 3 tribal villages and to Tekumarada, the district town. Alimaya has 70 acres of land. I noticed that some fields in the village are planted with very unusual plants that I have never seen before, and I realized that 9 families in this village are involved in a very special business that requires specific knowledge and skills. Silkworm growing was introduced under a government scheme. The government provided training and supplies silkworm eggs. Involved families perform intermediary role in a huge chain of silk production in India. They grow silkworms until they turn into butterflies and leave their silk cocoon. These cocoons are then collected by the government and silk is extracted by special machines. Mr. Murugesa explained that this business assures regular income for his family. He can afford to educate his sons in the city. He employs 2 other people 15 days a month and has income for other needs. Head of the village Siranan explained to me that one family in the village gets sufficient income from the cultivation of banana crops, and I really had the impression that Alimaya is a vibrant village with diversified economic activities. The village has a good school, so children don't have to travel long distances. However, a young farmer, Ramasamy, insisted talking to me and explained that 30 families in this village rely on agriculture and they feel neglected. They grow cash crops and their harvest depends on the rainfall. Crop failure makes villages very vulnerable because they take seeds, fertilizers and pesticides on credit. If their crop fails, they cannot repay their debts. Ramasamy showed me his neat fields that were ready to cultivate, but explained that he can't do anything. It is clear that in both villages, people cannot address the irrigation issue by themselves because they don't earn enough to make investments. It looks that agriculture activities are not financially viable, but what else can the villagers do in such an isolated area? I am now going to meet the villages of Chemanatam and Budanatam on the northern side of the Nilgiris. There has been rain in the area and I hope the situation with agriculture will be different. Both villages are isolated by jungle from the main road and the tribal town of Masinagude, which is approximately 10 kilometers away. Access to the villages is very good by a sealed road, as many wildlife tours are organized by local operators. I have arranged an interview with the heads of Chemanatam village, Masina and Arsidin. They told me that they settled in this location 40 years ago. They liked the location because there was fertile land next to the rivers around forest. The government granted them 64 acres of land. Initially, 15 families settled in the village. They used to build their houses from leaves, bamboo and mud, but later gave up this method as the government started building houses for their Adivasis. Today, all 45 families live in government-built houses. I asked the heads of the village what resources the village had, and the answer surprised me very much. Arsidin, who just talked about fertile land, the river and the forest, suddenly said, "We have no resources at all. We have to earn our living. We have to work in the fields. We have no funding, totally no funding, so everyone has to go and work." They have land, but they say they have no tools and cattle. They have water around, but no infrastructure for irrigation. They have forest around, but the access is restricted as the government's policies favor wild animal protection. Capitalist economy has left the Adivasis with no choice but to sell themselves as cheap labor. As Marx would say, this can be achieved dehumanizing the powerless and regarding them as nothing more than a labor commodity. According to Keystone, one of the largest non-governmental organizations operating in the Nilgiris, the principal issue that Adivasis face in India today is cultural erosion. They have been marginalized for various reasons. The areas are shrinking because of economic activities, globalization, the needs from the urban centers. There is an identity crisis among them, as they were originally hunter-gatherers and people who lived in harmony with the forest and biodiversity systems. That's all changing now.
What happens in an area like Masnigudi, which is the Nilgiri district, or if you look at Tamil Nadu, where Nilgiri district is part of Tamil Nadu state, we have a much more complex situation because you're talking about a very small number of tribal people who are surrounded by non-tribals. So just to give you an example of our district, we have 800,000 people and there are only 25,000 tribal people. So the proportion is very, very small. Even in a state like Tamil Nadu, we are just about 1.25% of tribal population. So for a vote bank, for politicians, to to get interested in this population is hardly anything. So then what you do? So what we have tried to do to bring the tribal cause and the tribal identity up is, you have to be able to look at biodiversity and tribal societies together, because they go hand in hand. And if biodiversity systems have to be conserved, their qualities have to go up. But the situation in the whole country as such, I would say, tribal people, their situation is extremely vulnerable.
Keystone research found that the management of the resource has shifted from indigenous groups to the state. This has caused several community-based systems to collapse and increase their dependence on a centralized body. While talking to Marsana and Arsidin, I asked them about how indigenous institutions, such as local panchayat, help them to address different issues. And just a day before our interview, I read in the Hindu that the presidents of the village panchayats are worried how to spend the huge increase in government funds coming their way for urgent development work in the villages. The heads of Chemanatam and the other nearby village of Budanatam were so skeptical about this. They said that the panchayat does nothing, it is just a name. The villages have to pay them even for small services. The panchayat doesn't do anything for the public. Panchayat gets money from the government, but it never reaches the villages. If the panchayat helped them, they would be much better off. Center for Science and Environment Research shows that it takes 3.65 rupees to transfer 1 rupee of program money to the poor, and 58% of subsidized food doesn't reach the poor. The Indigenous World Report 2007 found that the budgetary allocations intended for the welfare of the Adivasis are often grossly misused and underused. It is difficult to understand that such large government investments were made in providing electrified fences and irrigation or housing schemes for tribal villages, and yet after 1 or 2 years they are unserviceable and urgently needing repair. Villagers told me that check dams were very poor quality when they were built, and it is obvious that maintenance costs were not included in any of the projects. Suresh, elder of the village, says, "The electric fence was erected 10 years ago. At the time there were many problems with wild animals, and the villagers asked the forest department to install an electric fence. When the fence was installed, we could cultivate our land. We also were provided with motor for irrigation and power. For 2 years it was good. Then battery went weak and we didn't know how to maintain it, and the forest department didn't help us with the maintenance. The elephants, wild boars and bears destroyed the fence very quickly. Then we couldn't continue cultivation of the fields anymore." An old Indian saying states, "Farming is the best occupation, business is the second best, and working for someone else is the worst." I talked to Sagumaran, who is 48. He is determined to do cultivation as he doesn't like to work for anybody else. He has a piece of land near the river. He explained to me that only 3-4 families in Chemanatam can do cultivation of cash crops, only those whose land is close to the river. He's about to start sowing beans, but before doing this, he has built a small shed on his field. Like his neighbors, he will spend every night in the shed until the crops are harvested. They have to protect the crop from wild animals such as wild boars, bisons, or elephants. They use fire and make different sounds to frighten the animals from their fields. I calculated how much his effort was worth. If the market price is good, He will get some profit, taking into consideration that he had already borrowed 5,000 rupees or 63 pounds to be spent on food between now and when the beans are ready to harvest. However, there are many risks for him to get in debt. Wild animals, low market prices of beans, high transportation costs. It is very clear that he has no capacity to suffer even a small crop loss. Indian Social Institute point out that tribals struggle to increase their purchasing power and adopt the strategies of the market economy that are so contradictory to their historical informal economy, and they are absolutely drowned in the modern mainstream of life. Villages are increasingly dependent on a market economy, and they are the most vulnerable players in this game. They grow vegetables to sell at a very cheap price as there is a huge competition, and then most of the income they spend to buy food. Stanta Kekare explained that just 10 years ago, the Adivasis defined wealth as the earth, forests, water, culture, unity, songs, children. This notion of wealth being steadily eroded as it slowly becomes more and more synonymous with money. When economy is divorced from culture, politics, social relationships, wealth simply means money, money, and more money.
Earlier on, if a landlord did not pay them a fair wage, did not pay them the minimum wage that was declared by the government, we could mobilize 200 tribals to go and catch hold of the landlord by the collar and demand that a fair wage be paid. But today, when the prices crash, whose collar do you go and catch? They say it's market forces. Who is this market force? Where is this market force? Where do you protest? And even the government pleads helplessness and says these are market forces, there's nothing we can do. And so this market force has become a very nice euphemism to make forces of exploitation anonymous. And therefore you cannot actually make it very difficult to deal with it. To me, the market force is a very nice, convenient way for the rich to hide the kind of exploitation that is going on, and where they can continue to extract wealth from local economies and under a complete legitimate umbrella. So market forces are suddenly very legitimate. It's perfectly all right, if it's the market force.
Women from Chemanatam and Buddhanatam explained that their biggest worry every day is how to feed the family. They cannot get a job every day, and the food that they and their families eat depends on the money earned from the working that day. They sometimes sell their sugar ration cards to the shops to get some money. Women's list of domestic duties include carrying water, cooking, washing, and bathing the children. Everything is done in the evening when they come back from work. Collecting wood is men's responsibility in both villages, but when husbands are drunk, women have to do this as well. They mentioned that alcoholism is a big problem, especially in Chemanatam, as they are closer to Masanagudi. Women do not have any great ambitions in their life. They would be so happy to have more food supplies and a nursery to leave the children when they are at work. Their wish is also to have more sleep and time for themselves. Many of them would prefer to work in their own fields rather than working on tea or coffee plantations. The only entertainment in their life is TV. TV sets were distributed to the villages under a government scheme. Unfortunately, Buddhanatham village cannot receive any TV programs as they can't afford to pay the monthly fee. A happy day in the village is when they get 1,000 rupees or 12 pounds annual financial support from the Forest Department for agricultural activities, mainly for plowing fields. Women told me that they spend this money on food as there is no point to plow when there is no rain or no irrigation. Every family was buying sweet luxuries for the children. A salesman arrived simultaneously with the officials of the forest department. I asked Beizsley and Mari, who have the largest family in Kemenatan, to tell me how they cope. They have 6 children and all live in this small government-built house. Beizsley works in a coffee plantation and Mari plows fields for other people. Family's total income approximately 900 rupees or 11 pounds per week. I calculated that this family lives above poverty line. Mari is very lucky to have 2 bullocks. He raised them from small and now they are the main source of income for the family. They have 1 acre of land near the house and grow ragi and beans only for their own needs. They also have 9 chickens that lay 2 eggs a day. The only family possessions in the house are a TV set, dishes to cook food, and photographs. They all sleep on the mats on the floor, which is damp. Cooking is done mainly outside to reduce the smoke hazards. If they had more money, they would buy some goats for milk, some sheep and clothes for the children. It was obvious that this family can hardly make ends meet, and they didn't complain. Mari is the only man in the village who does washing, and I saw him many times coming back from the river with washed and dried clothes. However, this family remains extremely vulnerable for any sudden shock. The oldest girl, Shanti, cannot go to school because of regular body pains. She feels very weak and very tired, but has to look after the youngest girl while her parents work. They cannot afford to take Shanti for a medical check because of the high costs. We take Shanti to have a blood test and cover all the related expenses. Her mom would have to work 7 days a week to generate such an amount. Later results revealed that Shanti is malnourished and had started to reach a critical state. I went to the tribal clinic in Valotatam, that is more than 10 kilometers away, to discuss with the doctor and local nurse the results of the blood test. Shanti badly needed nutritional supplements, iron and calcium. The doctor said that animal protein and fish was desperately required to give the tribals a balanced diet. However, none of the Adivasis can afford this luxury, and so their health remains unbalanced. Most of Kemenatan children go to the Good Shepherd School. The principal, Dr. Babu Narendran, said that the rural tribe children are very bright. They are equally to learn like other children, but teachers always have to consider their psychological build-up, as they have fear complex of outside world. Care and love help them to open up. The best student in the 5th grade is a tribal girl. He emphasized that Irulas understand benefits of education. Their children desire to go to school and develop. The young people in Kemenatan told me that they all have 6, 7 and 8 grades education. They were forced to leave school because they have to help their parents earn a living. They, like many young people around the world, have many dreams. Boys told me that they all sleep in the community hall and most of their time is spent there as their houses are very small. They like playing volleyball a lot but cannot afford to buy a net and a ball. They also dream to have gym facilities in their community hall. They saw my visit as a hope that something will change. I had a feeling that they believe that help has to come from outside, as not much help is available from within. One message came across during my conversations with women, men, and youth in the villages, that in spite of all difficulties, they all are very attached to their locations. They all appreciate that they live in beautiful surroundings close to nature. They don't want to go anywhere. However, modernization left them absolutely powerless and dependent. This is where all modernization theories fail, and globalization cannot provide solutions. Rulers adopted all modern development attitudes. So why are they so poor? I believe many would say that I have to look for the answer to this question in the Indian caste system. So I decided to talk to the president of the village's Boswan, who is the main person in charge of all cultural rituals. He explained to me a very complicated tribal caste system that regulates social aspects of their life. Any violation of tradition carries relevant punishments. It looked harsh to me, but for them it is what they think is right, and respect for the ancient culture. The president emphasized that development is left for people themselves, but social issues have to be under control and traditions have to be observed. I feel the Adivasis are trapped between traditional and modern dimensions. The president made it clear that culture has nothing to do with development, and it is obvious that development doesn't include their culture. If caste system predetermines poverty in India, so why do we have increasing levels of poverty around the world? There should be something in common. The lowest caste or social classes are just groups of marginalized people that reflect exploitative relations within given society.
I think the Adivasis of India and indigenous people and Adivasis of the world, they have the same identity. Even in terms of their rapport and behavior with natural systems, their interest in the culture that they follow, and they're extremely... An Adivasi anywhere in the world stands out in the sense that they are not driven by economic forces. Even here, after working for 10-15 years with them, economic activity, however thriving it is, will not attract an Adivasi after a point, unlike non-Adivasis, who would take complete advantage of an economic activity to sort of go up the ladder. They would want something which is very intrinsically linked to their culture, to their rituals, to the seasons, to the nature systems, to all the customs that they follow. And that is something which is very, it goes across the whole world. They all have a very close link to natural systems. They have a relationship that they follow. And that relationship is very crucial to their living. If you delink that relationship, then you have a problem of Adivasis being more vulnerable, and they come to a situation where it's difficult for them to survive in this changing world.
When we talk about development as a progress, we should note that this has occurred in these remote villages. They have drinking water, electricity, and even TVs. The Adivasi children can go to school. However, they have lost something that cannot be measured in economic terms: the power over their own lives. The entire livelihood is controlled and totally dependent on people far away who don't have to live with the outcome of their decisions.
I say it is a mistake to compare people against themselves. That does not give us any indication of whether there is justice or not. If we compare them against themselves, then they are fine. But what we have to compare is their share of the wealth that is available. So if you take the share of the wealth of their share of the local wealth of Gudlur 20 years ago and their share of the local wealth of Gudlur today, their share has actually come down. And that is why I will say they are poor. So when we say that India has a 8% economic growth, if the tribals or the other Dalits or any of the poor people of India also had an 8% economic growth, there is no problem. But this entire 8% is accounted for by a very small percentage of the population. And not only the population, they also trickle down, it's actually businesses. Because we know from, not my facts and figures, but from official facts and figures, the banking sector and the insurance sector and the IT sector, these three sectors account for this 8% growth. So it's only the people who are part of the sector who are benefited in any way.
We are all citizens of a global family, and I ask myself what I can do for these people. I can promise them that they will be heard. However, I can't promise that the issues will be addressed.